Good. Brilliant. Good. Okay. So just to say that this is Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub. This is the March edition, and we have the privilege of having in our midst Professor Akindotun Merino.
Yes, died.
And Professor Merino is a professor of psychology with a passion to implement transformational structures for the 21st century. She's a researcher with interest in studies that reduce social and mental health disparities. She firmly believes that mental health is community health, which should be accessible and affordable. Akin Merino is a passionate leader who advocates successfully in driving regulatory and standard compliance in this field. In higher education, she has served as vice president and president at universities in Southern California. She has worked with community agencies and hospitals as director of clinical training and served as departmental head and college dean. So you can see that she's quite an eminent speaker. Dr. Merino serves as a mental commissioner in Southern California, and she's as also part of the commission to provide mental health oversight to residents in San Bernardino 4th District. She is the president of Black Women Congress, whose goal is to empower members of the community in the areas of spiritual, education, professional, and physical wellness. The Congress is a strength-based initiative for women and girls of color to achieve economic and emotional justice. Professor Merino is the founder of African Trauma Care Alliance, Africa's leading mental health organization dedicated to addressing advocacy, research, prevention, treatment of mental illness, and to promoting the overall mental health of all Africans. Dr. Merino is the CEO of JAS Group of Organizations and president of JAS Education Institute, whose mission is to provide trauma-based training to life coaches and mentor providers. JAS Institute has graduated and supervised the most trauma specialists in the country. Professor Merino is an author and international keynote speaker. She has authored several papers and books. She conducts trainings across the globe and recently published her first fiction, Sunset Street. So that's one to get. Dr. Merino serves on various boards and has received multiple awards. She was awarded the 2021 Woman of Distinction by the California Assembly Legislature. She lives in California with her family. When I put up this the post about this advert, I said that if there was anyone who was quite eminent and who was who has demonstrated the ability to talk on trauma to this particular community, I think it should be Professor Merino. So I'm extremely delighted, and I hope you're as delighted as I am to welcome to tonight's meeting, Professor Merino. Thank you for joining us, and it's a delight to have you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. You were reading that. I was like, who's that? Thank you for taking the time to read it. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here to speak with your group. I love talking about trauma. So this is something that we would do. I hear some people are still, maybe they have their, they're not muted.
Yeah,
so
I'm going to do that. Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a way for us to just kind of mute everyone. But if not, here we go.
I'm going to mute all in a minute and then unmute you. I'll mute all in a minute and then I'll mute you. Yeah.
Okay. All right, are we good?
Yes, I think, are you unmuted now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yes.
Okay,
good.
All right, so we're good. All right, everyone, welcome. Hopefully this will be transformative, beneficial to you. If you have any questions, obviously put in the chat box. And I also love when people are engaged in the process. So I'm going to ask you to do things while I'm talking. Doc, thank you so much for your awesome organization. You're indeed adding value to the community. So well done. All right, so let's start. Let's just begin this. I'm going to share my PowerPoint and then we'll just talk. Is that okay? All right. you should be able to see. Hold on, you're saying something else. You should be able to. You should be able to see my my PowerPoint now, correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, so today we're going to talk about trauma. There's mental health, and this is a mental health program, but a part of the mental health that we want to focus on today is about trauma, because I believe that we don't know a lot about trauma, and if we really knew what trauma is, that then we'll really begin to understand why some things in our lives are the way they are, right? So some things in our lives are the way they are. And one of the good things that happened with COVID, honestly, is that people started talking a lot more about trauma than ever before. And so that was something, if there was anything good that came out of that it's not like COVID is over, but during the lockdown and all of that, we know that people started talking a lot more about trauma. And so when we're talking about psychological trauma, when you're a medical doctor and you're in the medical field, you know what trauma is. People really talk about physical trauma, medical trauma, and things like that. But when we're talking about psychological trauma, we're talking about something that we all are going to experience at some point in our lives, because they're traumatic events all around us. We live in a world that is filled with suffering. We live in a world that so many things are happening. And so you'll find that you're going to either know someone who has experienced a traumatic event in their life, or you're going to have experienced a traumatic event in your life. So what is the definition? Everybody says, oh, trauma this and trauma that. Are we all traumatized? I mean, what is going on? All right, so when we talk about about traumatic events and trauma, they're two peas in a pod, but they're two different things. So let me explain this. So a traumatic event is anything that has happened to you. It could be a single event, it could be several events that has happened, but it has come to shift you from your source of safety, that has come to shift you from the core of your being, of your resources. Anything that has any experience that has completely overwhelmed your ability to respond to it, anything that then begin to cause psychological responses from you, that is a traumatic event. All right, so traumatic events are things like, you can put in the chat box if you can think of a traumatic event. What are traumatic events that we've experienced? COVID is a traumatic event that has happened to all of us globally. But what are some other traumatic events that you can think of that happens? You just put in the chat box, please, and I'm going to watch out for it. All right. I have to use my glasses to see a little bit of this. Okay. Yeah. Death of a loved one. I see bereavement. There you go. There you go. Fights. Okay. Being bullied. Absolutely. Absolutely. Domestic abuse. Well done. Well done. Well done. Yes. Yes. So these are all traumatic events, like, all types of sexual abuses, loss of a job. Absolutely. So you can just keep adding that to the chat box. So traumatic events are all around us. They happen all the time, right? Now, trauma is the after effect of a traumatic event that has not been processed properly. All right. So trauma is your reaction to the traumatic events. So this is when we have encountered this event and it causes something in us to shift. It causes something in us to go out of order. Is this making sense? So trauma is the after effect of traumatic events. Yeah, does that make sense? So when those traumatic events happen, not everybody is going to be traumatized. You understand? We can all go through traumatic events, but not everyone is going to be traumatized. Some of us are more resilient than others. Some people, if you exist in places where there is a lot of in a healthy environment, you might actually, react better than somebody else, right? So when we say you're traumatized, it's not the same as just experiencing the traumatic event. So let's be clear on that. Yeah. All right. So these are some, I just put some other definitions here for you to see that, that, like the last one, I want to punctuate that. A particular event may be experienced as traumatic for one person and not for another. So which means that it is subjective. Now, as a clinician, or if you're a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and you're using the manual to the DSM, for example, to actually define PTSD and define trauma, you won't say subjective. But when we look at trauma globally, when you look at the trauma, you're going to have to look beyond some of these definitions, and you have to look at it in how we respond to disaster. How do we respond to suffering? And when we respond to suffering differently, we know that just because one thing didn't traumatize you doesn't mean that it's not going to traumatize me. Yeah. I wish I could hear your voices to say that you are with me. So here we go. The event, these are some of the hallmarks of trauma. The event is unexpected. All right. So the event is unexpected because if you expect it, then you would prepare for it, which is the second thing. The victim was unprepared for the event, and there was nothing you could have done to prevent it. And then this last part is that there has to be some psychological, emotional responses. So there's fear, there's shame, there's helplessness, there's horror, there's terror, and all of this happens. Now, people say things, some of my students will say, well, but look, prof, like, in the army, like, they prepare, they train, and then, but they still get there's a lot of PTSD for veterans and things like that. Just because you physically or technically prepare for something doesn't mean that you emotionally or psychologically prepare for that thing. You understand what I'm saying? Even during domestic violence or child abuses, when you know the perpetrator is going to come to your room, is going to sexually abuse you or sexually violate you, you know that it's going to happen, but it doesn't mean that you are emotionally or psychologically ready for this. You can't handle that. So that's the difference. And what we're talking about. And then who can be traumatized, people? Like anybody can be traumatized. Anybody can be traumatized. Anyone can be traumatized. And this is where when we run a program here that is the intersection of faith and mental health. Because when we go into especially churches and all the religious places, when people will say, oh, I'm protected because I'm a Christian, I'm a protected because I believe Allah would help me, or God will help me, or Jesus, nothing, trauma is not my portion. And then when you go to religious to cultural places, you go to cultural places where because of our culture, we just don't even identify those things. And I'm Nigerian, and when you in my culture, for example, they would say that you are, when you talk about mental illness or mental health, they think you're crazy. They're talking about someone who is crazy. So we don't want to be identified as crazy. And so we have cultural impacts. We have religious people think it's the devil, and you have to cast the devil out from somebody, or if you just pray harder, and if you just fast some more, things will be okay. And now, not that those things, I'm not against any of those, because they're part of They're part of protective factors that you should have. There's studies and research that shows us that people who are more spiritual they're just healthier, period. Right? And so we understand that, but it doesn't preclude the identifying and working on your mental health. Without your mental health is part of your wellness, and anybody can be traumatized. So when you're traumatized, it impacts every part of your being. It even changes, and I'm going to show you how it changes the trajectory of your life. For me, I as just a ministry, man. Like people need to know this, because there's healing in just knowledge, and there's healing in getting help. So let's move on. So anybody can be traumatized. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your job is. It doesn't matter anything. Anybody can be traumatized if you're a human being. These are some of the elements that we want to make sure that we're clear about. Some of those elements are things like you just keep remembering some of those traumatic experiences. It comes in, maybe you go to a place and then it just triggers everything. You remember it, smells, sounds, physical sensations, you remember those things, or you live your life in such a way that you don't want to remember. You want to avoid every reminders of the trauma. So people will move countries, they will change addresses, they will stop talking to people, they will remove themselves from different sections, they will not go to different areas because they do not want reminders of that trauma, or they're completely numb. They're just completely numb. I've talked to people who will say, look, Doc, I know what you want me to do, but I'm not ready to go into that place because it's just going to be a dark hole. They're completely numb, they're detached, they dissociate, which means that they just, it's almost as if it happened to somebody else, and you just keep living life as if you're okay when you're really not. And then, you find that there are other things that are happening in your life just to increase arousal. You find that you're constantly on alert. You're constantly yelling. You're constantly frustrated. You don't have any patience for anything. You're moving at 200 miles an hour. Nothing is ever in a calm state in your life. Very irritable, just very, always thinking, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And, maybe you find it difficult to sleep. And these are just some of the things. We'll talk about some other things later. Always, just the most thing I want you to remember is constantly on alert. You're upregulated, constantly on alert. Now, this is where I just love to talk about this particular part, because see what I told you to, remember when I asked you to just give me a list of traumatic events, and we all listed the usual things that we all talk about, right, as a society. And I love your chats. I'm looking at some of them. Yeah, as a society, these are the things that we have agreed to. We have said, look, we know that accident is a trauma. We know that a hurricane is a trauma. We know that mass shooting is traumatic. Kidnapping is traumatic. We know that terrorism is traumatic. We know sexual abuse is traumatic. We know all of those big things as a community, all those things that we have decided as traumatic. Those are the things we call big T's. They're the big T trauma, right? Or type 1 traumas. They're type 1 or big T traumas. These are the major things that we have decided this is traumatic. Right? But guess what? There are the other things that are also traumatic and can actually be more egregious than big T traumas. Yeah, they're your type 2 traumas. We call them adverse life experiences, right? It used to be called little T's, but we've changed that to adverse life experiences, because when you say little T's, it's almost as if it's it's less than, but that's not it. Studies after studies have shown that this type 2 traumas, these adverse life experiences, are more insidious because you don't catch them in time. And they're the ones that actually usually would lead to developmental trauma, which I'm going to talk about. And they end up leading to complex trauma. So these are the letdowns. These are emotional neglect. Emotional neglect. These are criticism, constant naggings, not being able to accept the child for who they are. Not just, you can put some other things there if I'm not remember. What are some other type 2 traumas around us? Things like microaggressions, all kinds of isms, all kinds of favoritisms, any kind of emotional abuses, psychological abuses, any type of narcissistic behaviors, all these things that allow, that people sometimes don't even consider as traumatic. They're just as insidious as the big T. And sometimes it's even worse. When I have clients who tell me things like, I got into a car accident or something happened to me, but the one that wounds them the most is the one that they would remember the most is this breakup, how this person treated me, how that person, who promised to be there and decided, that I was nobody, the person, how they treated me, those interpersonal things are much more devastating to the human system than any external thing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So so we have to differentiate those traumas, but one is not less and one is not like bigger than the other. In fact, we need to treat them as just traumas and make sure that we take care of them. The studies show us in trauma-informed care, study shows us that it takes about 7 years for a child to even speak up about any traumatic events that they experience. It's 7 years. So imagine that. All the stuff they will be going through those 7 years. And that's the average. There are those who will never speak anything until forever, maybe in their adult life. And Doc, please make sure you keep me on time because I'm trying to go as fast as I can so that I can cover what I can cover. Let's look at this one. So I want to look at some of the symptoms that just a few physical symptoms I think that would help you. Night terrors, not being able to sleep, if you're extremely fatigued and it's not related to any medical reasons, right? You have difficulty concentrating, you can't focus on any one thing, your anxiety, the thing with trauma is it co-occurs with a lot of things. So trauma would co-occur with depression. It would co-occur with an eating disorder. It would co-occur with anxiety. So you're going to have a lot of things. When you have trauma, there's always something else. So it co-occurs with substance abuse. So having extreme startle reflex, maybe just angry and you don't even know why you're so angry. When you withdraw from social situation or personal relationships, you just, if you're in a group, for example, like a social media group or something, and somebody says something and annoys you and immediately you leave the group, somebody, you just exit, you don't have time, you don't have the patience for anybody. So mood swings today, you never really know what's going on with you today. You're happy, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing that's going on. Feeling numb, I've talked about that. It's dissociating sometimes. You just feel like I'm disconnected from reality. And it seems as if you're living life in your own space. And the real life is like just happening outside of you. That's what it feels like. A lot of somatic, or what we call aches and pains around that you can't explain them by other reasons. It's not because, something is medically wrong or physically wrong with you. You find yourself getting just headaches and neck aches and all these aches all over you, or that immune systems, it's just so impacted where you're getting sick all the time. And then, you get all kinds of what do you call it? All kinds of medical issues. You can high blood pressure, diabetes, all kinds of medical issues will also find yourself in chronic health conditions. So those are some physical things I wanted to look at. Then look at behavioral changes. Like I said, it co-occurs with a lot of things. So you find yourself now drinking more than usual, smoking more than usual, or picking up things, having all kinds of relationships. You're having affairs here and there. You find yourself, getting into all kinds of addiction. Either you're overeating, or you go into porn, or you start using drugs, or prescription drugs. A lot of those things happen. Or the next thing is also avoidance. And this can be very common, where we don't need to talk about it. We don't need to, that's past, that's done. God is my savior, and this. We don't talk about it. We just leave it alone. You don't want to, you don't even want to look at it. Or denial. You just deny, like, no, that didn't happen. It wasn't a big deal. It happens to everybody. It happened to my mom. It happened to my dad or my grandma. I mean, come on, this happens to everybody. So we don't need to, let's not spend all the time talking about this. Come on, man up. You're like a man up, or, do something, be a strong woman, And unfortunately, we also pass it down to our children. Yeah. Okay, I think I've talked about this. All right, so I'm just going to briefly, and if you have any questions, just keep writing them down. I'm sure we're coming to them. So let's look at, I'm just going to briefly talk about 4 types of traumas, all right? I think that I'm going to look at 4. So vicarious trauma, I cannot start without telling you about this. Vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma, another term for it is secondary trauma. It's secondary trauma. Now, vicarious trauma is a secondary type of trauma, right? And it is the trauma that you get from listening to the stories of other people's traumas. Yeah. This is when you're constantly listening to survivors' story of their own trauma, and you're going, that's why it's called vicarious. When you say I'm living vicariously through you, it's secondary. So this usually impacts a lot of you who are working in mental health, you're working in medical field, who are attorneys, who are pastors, ministers, all of these people who you're constantly listening to people's stories of suffering. When we're listening to people's stories of suffering, it impacts us, the listener. No matter how qualified you are, it impacts you. There's something about hearing it over and over and over again without us knowing their traumas now become our trauma because we're sharing space with them. So the very thing that we say is needed for you to be a good counselor, to be a good listener, which is empathy. That very thing that makes you a good listener and a good person to talk to is the very reason that is the very thing that would allow you to be wounded. So it is a two-edged sword, right? It's beneficial for you to be able to do that for the person, but it also puts you at risk for vicarious trauma. So vicarious trauma is that I am going to be the beneficiary of the consequences of the trauma stories that I'm listening to. So it's why it's called secondary. So, so if you're a teacher or you're a pastor or you're an attorney or somebody and you're listening to all the stories every day, you're listening to them and you're listening to them, all of a sudden you go home, you start overprotecting your children, you lose your things will start going awry with your relationships, you can't sleep, and you're like, what's going on with me? It's called vicarious trauma. When you're exposed to the other people's horror. And that vicarious trauma is indeed very, see that load? It is one of the worst trauma. It is, let me bring it back. It is worse than burnout, and everybody focuses on burnout. It is worse than burnout, is worse than compassion fatigue. And vicarious trauma is a professional injury. It's a professional risk. That is where you get it. It's because of all the stuff you're listening to. So you should know this. So that if you are in any place, in any position where you're constantly listening to horror stories of people's lives, that you are going to need to protect yourself. You're going to need to protect yourself. You cannot leave yourself so wide open, because then you are going to become traumatized, but you never actually experience the trauma, if that makes sense. I put this here because this is a PTSD. It should have said PTSD specifically. This is a PTSD definition. All right, this is what PTSD definition using the DSM-5. You can also use the ICD to define it, but there are only three things that for you to be diagnosed with PTSD, okay, let me just say this. In our own manual here, the DSM-5, the only diagnosis that that needs a pre-exposure, that needs a pre-event is trauma. There's no other diagnosis that needs an exposure element. So this is the only one. And it is saying that in order for you to qualify, to even look at you as if you have a PTSD or if you have acute stress, three things need to have happened. You need to have been exposed to something. You need to have been exposed to a traumatic event. All right. And for that, the ICD is a little bit different. I'll tell you what that is. But it's either actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence, right? Now, we know that this is not the only thing that causes trauma, but from this particular manual, that you need to have been exposed to that, either directly exposed to it, witnessed it in person, or you've learned of it from somebody else that's close to you, that these things have happened, right? So that is important. Now, remember when I was talking to you about secondary trauma, look at the last bullet here. It says, or experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of the traumatic event. That is vicarious trauma. So it is so important for us to have actually listed it. So when somebody has experienced for post-traumatic stress disorder, that's PTSD, for someone to qualify for PTSD, they must have been exposed to something. Something must have happened. And those things are either death or threatened death, actual or threatened serious injury, or sexual violence. And sexual violence includes, all types of sexual violence, including rape, including any kind of sexual assault. That would include that. So that's important. So PTSD is a serious diagnosis. You need to actually get diagnosed with it. Please don't go around diagnosing yourself with stuff. You need to get a diagnosis. You need to go to Dr. Ajayi and actually get a diagnosis before you, because the people start saying, "Oh, I have this, I have this." This workshop is not so you can diagnose yourself. This is just so you can get a general overview of what is happening, right? And then, so I've talked about vicarious trauma. We've taken a brief look at what PTSD is. And now let's look at developmental trauma, which is one of the things that I love to talk about. Because you've all heard of ACEs, right? Most of us know what adverse childhood experiences are. We've talked about them. I love to talk about this because this is so preventable. This is so preventable. This is how we save our world. This is how we save ourselves. You see, the home is supposed to be the Eden. The home is supposed to be the breathing place of life, but a lot of wounding comes from the home. And once the child is wounded, once the child is psychologically or emotionally wounded, it literally can change the person that they're supposed to be. It changes them in the structure of their very being. And if you ever come take any of my workshops, when I'm really training about this, you will see this. You will see how that child is severely displaced from their place of self. For them, there's no self-agency, and they're going to develop coping mechanisms for the rest of their lives. And that becomes a personality that they now adopt. And they'll say, oh, this is just me. No. That is just your traumatized self. That's a coping mechanism. That's a trauma response. So, this adverse childhood experiences. There was a study that was done here in the United States by CDC and Kaiser Permanente. They did this study, and they studied over 17,500 people. Now, that's a big study in behavioral health. In any study, it's a big study because it's, of course, there's money involved and all of this thing. So it's a big study. And when you have big studies like that, they end up being what we call classics. If you're a researcher, you understand what I'm saying. They're your classic studies. They're the studies that you keep on referring to because they're that big. When they measured 17,500 people, and would you know that they found that at least over 67% of them had experienced a traumatic event in their lives, right? Now, this study was done with mostly college-educated white Americans, and mostly were male. Right. So you may be like, okay, well, that study is skewed. How are we going to even bring up this study as a classic? Because it is only amongst a very narrow part of the entire global population, right? But when people have replicated the ACEs test in different places around the world, we have found that it's usually the same percentage or higher of how prevalent, how pervasive trauma is. Actually, my institute is part of the one that's actually created one for Africa. We used the one for WHO, and we were able to create an ACEs that was an African ACEs, which included a whole bunch of things like child marriage. It included a whole bunch of things like religious persecution and things like that. So ACEs is adverse childhood experiences, and it actually has a survey, like a tool, where a screening tool where there are questions, and it's going to ask you questions of, if you've experienced this, you answer yes. If you experienced that, yes or no. If you scored yes, you score 1 point. So the higher your ACEs level, the higher your ACEs score, all right, the higher the score, the more probability it is that proclivity you have to other adverse adult experiences, adverse experiences in your life. Let me see if if I even have, let's see. No, I'm gonna see if I have, okay, yes, I do. Here are some lasting impacts of adverse childhood experiences. This is just some lasting impact of it. As you can see, adverse childhood experiences would impact your education, occupation, income, how you show up, opportunities in life. Do you have a friend, or do you know somebody, and you're like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you exploring this? Why aren't you exploring that? But when people have experienced ACEs and they have higher scores of high ACEs scores or ACEs experiences, you find that they are living in their survivor brain. All right. Let me share this with you. I'm going to do this. Give me one quick second. I'm just going to stop and do this because it's going to explain a lot. So give me one quick second. I'm going to stop this. Are you all with me? Raise your hand if you're with me. You're jiving with what I'm saying. You're understanding it. Just kind of like put your hand up so I can see it. Like we're in this together, right? Okay, excellent. All right. So I want to explain this, and I'll go back to the PowerPoint because it's really important. We have what is called the tripartite brain. You have the three. We call the reptilian brain. That is the same brain we have in common with reptiles. It's the same brain you have in common with lizards. So what do you see as lizard? What is the lizard constantly doing? The lizard is constantly, running away, trying to hide, trying to survive. Yeah, that's called your survival brain. It's your oldest brain. And then you have your midbrain, which is your mammalian brain. That brain is where your emotions and all your emotional processing happens. In that brain, you have the fight or flight, systems there. I don't want to go too deeply into this. So that's that brain. And then you have this brain right here, which is your neocortex. You can put your hand down, people. Thank you. It's your neocortex brain. It's in this brain that beautiful things happen. It's your executive functioning brain. Your prefrontal cortex is part of it. It's where memory happens. It's where compassion is, and it's where empathy lies. It's where forgiveness happens. It's where cause and effect happens. Is where all the good things you want to happens in this front brain. When you are traumatized, when you are living in the throes of trauma, the two back brains here, your survival brain and your mammalian brain, collude together. And that's where you stay. You stay in survival mode. And some people stay in survival mode for the rest of their lives. So the tripartite brain, you have the reptilian, your mammalian, and your neocortex. All right. When we're doing very well in our world, and then this is where we're at in this prefrontal cortex. When you're in survival mode, you're always trying to survive. And trying to survive is not where God wants us to be. Trying to survive is not where we need to be. Where we need to be is where we're thriving, spirit, soul, body, finances, socially, in all areas of your life, if this makes sense. So that's what I want to say that because I'm going to go back to that PowerPoint to make a point. All right. So here we go. So the child who has experienced adverse childhood experiences, guess where they stay? They stay in that survival brain. They stay in that emotional place. That child is going to do everything possible to survive. They will manipulate, they would lie, they can become aggressive, they can become perfectionists, they can win all the prizes at school, and you're like, there's nothing wrong with my child. He or she scores, they get A's all through, and the top of this and the top of this. That could also be a survival, a trauma personality, because it's like, I'm going to build a wall of achievement around me so that I don't get hurt again. Or they can become that aggressive person who is the bully. Before you say one thing, they've said 20 things. Is that person that, he's like, I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to do this. That's that person, because they're saying that they're in survival mode. They're like, before you wound me, I will wound you. You understand? Or they could take up another personality where they just close themselves off from people, period. They're the ones who are going to go do a job in the middle of nowhere where nobody wants to go. They're not people, they're not people friendly because they don't trust anybody. Or they could pick up another one. This is all part of surviving. Or they could pick up another one where they're going to say this. They're going to say, the only way I'm going to survive is to make sure people like me, or is to make sure that people don't really see me. All right. And the way I do that is I'm going to become a messiah. I'm going to become a savior. I'm going to be a people pleaser. So that's the person where, they help everybody and their mother. They're the ones who will be the first in and the second out. They'll give you everything they have. They're the ones who never say no to anything. They're the ones who are going to be, if they're at church, they're in church 5 days a week, they're 7 days a week. They're in charge of everything. They're in charge of choir, they're in charge of this, in charge of this, in charge of that. Because their survival brain says, if you can do all of these things, you won't get hurt, or they won't see you to hurt you. You understand? So when a child has grown up in this adverse childhood system, they are at risk of this lasting effect of all of these things. But not only that, they stay in that part of their brain that will cause them to always want to survive. Is this making sense? Here is the good and the bad news for childhood experiences, which is why I spent so much on this. Look, epigenetics is a real thing. Epigenetics is the science of your gene expression. So this is the way I explain it. Your DNA is written in marker. You can't change it. But epigenetics is how we express those, right? That you can change. And it's usually the interface between nature, nurture, and your developmental stages in life. What does this got to do with trauma? Any trauma that is not processed will be handed over to the next generation, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. I was sharing a study this study came out during COVID lockdown, especially here this study came out, and I was sharing it with my students. The study came out in 2021. And it actually, the first study of its kind that traced epigenetics to 14 generations. 14 generations. So which means that I could keep passing stuff on to 14 generations. And so one of the students went, hey, Prof, but why 14? They probably stopped at 14. Are you listening to me? So now epigenetics is not just passing on bad stuff, by the way. You can pass on good things into your thing, in your genetic lines. Right? You can pass on good things because it's a use it or lose it sometimes, right? And so but it's the bad stuff that we're talking about. They're in the Christian world, we call it generational curses, right? There's a whole idea of generational trauma. How does this concept of generational trauma, what is that about? It's all about epigenetics. There are things that great-grandmother did not, and especially when you come from a culture that doesn't address these things. So you see that great-grandpa was just a very angry man, and he always had bouts of depression, and then it passes on, and then it passes on, and then it passes on. The best gift you can give your child is the gift of wellness. And the way you do that is making sure that you are well. So that all of your issues, they did not ask to be birthed. They did not ask to be born, right? So all my issues are going to pass on to my child if I don't deal with it. If I don't deal with it. I'll give you an example. This actually happened to me. So when I was in secondary school, I had a horrible experience with a dog. All right. I'm climbing a fence and the dog is after me, trying to maul me and stuff like that. So I was morbidly afraid of dogs. If I see one, now I'm a lot better. Now I can actually stay in a room with it. But back then, I just, no, don't bring it. And my husband one day decided to bring home a puppy because I don't think he knew my story back then. He just, babe, I got a puppy. I was like, puppy what? That thing is out of here, not happening. So one day, I heard a scream from outside. My daughter at the time was about 4 or 5 years old. I heard a scream and I walked outside and I saw him. He was climbed on my husband. She was jumped on him in the back like this. And I looked out and there was a dog. Now, this child, we never owned a dog. We never did anything, but my fear had gone on to her. You understand? This is how these things happen. Even when you think you're hiding it, even when you think nobody can see it, it has a way of spilling over to your children. So take care of your fears, take care of your traumas, so you do not pull it over to the children. How many minutes we have, Doc?
About 15 minutes more. Okay,
great. I can do it. So this is the last one. This is a complex trauma, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this right here by itself, it's a whole new, look, complex PTSD or complex trauma is the most severe form of trauma you can have. It is compounded, it is multiplied, and it usually starts from those adverse childhood experiences. You don't have to be an adult to have complex trauma. Teenagers are diagnosed with this. Okay. It is trauma that is, and I love this image. I love to show this image if you can see it. You just can see that image, right? So this is a normal life. Bad things happen, but the sun is out. The sun is out and those bad things happen, they'll go away. You'll take care of them. That's normal life. PTSD, you can see how that thing is sitting on your head, right, on the back, but there's not a lot of light out there. But look at complex trauma. What do you see? Complex trauma, it's all the darkness, the clouds, everything has caved in. It is different from other forms of trauma because it is compounded, it is cumulative. It is a bunch of stuff that happens to us. Complex trauma is when that child has been sexually molested, when that child has been neglected at home, that child that it doesn't feel like anybody loved her or him, that child that has been parentified. That means they became the parent and they lost their childhood. They never did anything for themselves because they had to take care of the house and they had to do all of these things. That child then gets set up for other traumas, right? Because all of these things are cumulative. They're happening every day. They're happening every day. That's the same child that will go to school and maybe try drugs to feel better. That's the same person maybe that will get bullied. That's the same person that's going to marry somebody that's going to abuse them. That's the same person that's going to go and marry, and have friends who are just going to be abusive to her. So that's what complex trauma looks like. All right. It is compounded. It is cumulative, right? And it feels as if everything is happening all at once. It is the most severe kind of trauma that we have, because by the time most people come for help, they have been dealing with it for 50 years. Because most people start coming for help in their 50s, especially women. Men, they don't even come. Most of them don't even show up. They start coming, and then you start thinking, they start dealing with issues that happened years ago, right? Cumulative and compounded. That's what complex trauma looks like. Why people respond differently? Why do people respond differently to different types of traumas? There are several reasons. Let me give you an example. And I'm going to just talk to you. Now watch this. If you are in a position, in a healthy, it's in the context of relationships that we heal. Trauma will isolate you. It is in the context of healthy relationships, healthy communities that we heal. So imagine you had a child, and it doesn't have to be a child. This can happen to an adult. You hear that your adult child, something happened to them, God forbid or whatever, something happens to them. Maybe a child touched the stove. How about that? How about that? A child touched a stove. What do we do in a healthy family? In an unhealthy family, what you do is you keep yelling. Get away from there. You can even beat that child. That's not the response I'm looking for. In a healthy situation, a child touches the stove and burnt themselves. The first thing you do is you hold the child and you say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And then you clean the wound. And then you bandage, then you do whatever you need to do with the wound. And then you sit down and you say, next time, do that, healthy relation. That child was traumatized, by the way. That child was traumatized. However, that child is not going to remain traumatized. You know why? Because the relationship, because the community was healthy enough to help the child heal. So not every one of us is going to need help. You understand? If you live in those type of relationship, protective spaces. If you're in a space where you can talk to somebody, the number is 6. You should have at least 3 people in your life who are, you can be emotionally open to. You can be open and unashamed, at least 3 people. And you should also have 3 people that you can be professionally open to, that can help you professionally. The number is 6. You have at least 6 people in your life that you can be yourself, that you can be open and unashamed, that they can see into you, and you can talk. You don't want just one person, because if something happens to that one person, you're in trouble. That's what you want, a team around you. It's like I'll keep repeating, it's within relationships that we heal, healthy relationships. God made us interconnected, interrelated. A baby doesn't know who he or she is until somebody shows them who they are. You understand? That's in that context. So having a social support is important, that you have a social support is important. So healthy social support. Then I'm going to also show you how to breathe. Breathing lets your brain know that you do not need to keep sending oxygen into into the networks, right? So you have to learn to breathe properly. So this is a part where if you're able to show your faces, if you're able,
There's still London one left.
Please do so, because I like to see us when we do this breathing thing. All right, so this will help you, especially if you are one who is like always panicky or you have a lot of anxiety about things. This will help you. This is 50% of the cure if you do it properly, right? My son is in medical training, so he's doing his clinical whatever right now, and it's funny when you talk to MDs and stuff, because they some of these things they don't take to. Hopefully now they're doing better. But he was like, why you all always talk about breathing? Like we don't all know how to breathe. But we all don't know how to breathe properly. When you are stressed, you don't breathe properly. So let's learn how to breathe. And they're different ones. I'm just going to show you one today. All right. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to inhale through your nostrils for 5 seconds. So you're going to count in your head, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale through your nostrils, and you're going to hold it for 6 seconds. All right. So 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Don't worry, you're not going to die. All right. So then you're going to exhale from your mouth as if you're blowing into a balloon. You know how you're blowing a balloon? You're going to for 8 seconds. The power is in the exhaling. Slowly exhale and exhale everything. So it looks something like this. So watch me. It looks something like this. Let everything out. So we're going to do that 3 times. You can close your eyes. It helps you a lot better when you close your eyes because you're not distracted. So let's do that on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, go. And when you're done, write on the chat box how it feels. How did that feel? Let me see. Somebody said calming. It feels good. Oh, I feel good. I like that. Relaxing, amazing. It feels good. Soothing. Absolutely. Now, if that calms you, honestly, and if you have a smart watch, or a smartphone, there's an app called Breathe or Breath. No, Breathe, because it's called Breathe. Download it and it would do the counting for you. And I have it. It will tell me all the time, it's time to breathe. It just comes up, because it's certainly when you're really busy, sometimes you forget to breathe. People don't know that they forget to breathe properly. So you do that, right? Now, I'm going to show you this, and we don't all have to practice this. If you are in the throes of anxiety, like you're really anxious, all right, do 4-4. So you hold it for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds. Hold it for 4 seconds, bring it out for 4 seconds. So they're shorter. Does that make sense? So that would also help you. Water is your friend. Can you all see my water? Okay. Water is your friend. When you watch a lot of old, like old shows, old, like in the, long time ago. When things happen to them, what is the first thing they offer the person? Water. Because they knew something that we don't practice anymore. Water calms, it has a calming effect. It would calm you down, but it also helps with your serotonin reuptake. All right. It helps with a lot of those chemicals because it's water is needed for the production of a lot of those endorphins, right? So you need water. Especially when you're feeling a lot depressed, low levels of serotonin, high levels of depression, right? So it's not just healthy for you, calming for you, it's good for you in aiding yourself to produce the chemicals that your brain needs. Does this make sense? So water is your friend, not fruit juice, not teas, not coffee. In fact, if you have anxiety, coffee is not what you should be drinking, by the way, because it doesn't work, So, calming teas, there are all kinds of trees like stress kind of, there's teas for stress and those things. Those are good, but they don't replace water. You should be drinking half your weight in ounces in water is what you should be drinking. So water is really good for you. Then the other thing, and most people, you've heard this over and over, but look, this is not about losing weight. Exercise. Exercise at least 30 to 40 minutes a day, for 4 days, 4 to 5 days a week is what you need, right? Because you need to be able to produce all of those, dopamine, serotonin, all of those, you need to be able to produce them. And when the more energy you put into those, then the better for you. So exercise. And what COVID taught us is this, that nobody has an excuse. The lockdown, we couldn't go exercise, but we were still exercising. You know why? Because YouTube is your friend. YouTube, you can run a marathon on YouTube. Just turn it on, walking, running, Pilates, yoga. Yoga is also very good, very, very good for trauma. If you find that you're in the throes of trauma, yoga is something that can calm you down. I know some Christians have a problem with yoga, then don't call it yoga, call it something else. It's the exercises that matters. So those are the things that you need. Spirituality is also good, making all your prayer, all your meditation, all of those, but don't do traumatic praying. A lot of cultures do what I call trauma praying. Trauma praying is when you go, you're doing all of those traumatic praying. You're so you're crying, you're whipping, you're doing all of that. That is your trauma coming out. So take care of the trauma so you can pray from a healthy space. Is this making sense? And I think that's all I got for you.
Ooh. Thank you so much, Professor Merino. I'm sure that everyone on this meeting would want to respond by how they are feeling. Could you just show us some emojis? Let's see what you are feeling right now. Let's just in the comments as well. Let's just show some emojis. I'm feeling very excited. I'm feeling energized. I'm feeling empowered. I'm feeling knowledgeable. So let's just see how people are feeling at the moment.
I can see the chat. I can see
let's yes, oh yes, thumbs up. Yes, good, empowered, awesome. All right, good. Thank you so much, Professor Merino. I'm just going to quickly say a few highlights from from all the notes that I was taking. Traumatic events are all around us. Physical preparation does not equate to emotional preparation. Faith and spirituality is good for mental health. However, it's also important for people who are faith ministers to be aware of that and to be aware of vicarious trauma where they can become traumatized. So we as caregivers need to take care of ourselves. You've talked about the minor traumas and how they can actually impact on people heavily, and how it's very easy to ignore that. And the profound figures about 7 years before a child actually speaks up when they've been traumatized, comorbidity of trauma with other mental illnesses, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, other anxiety disorders, substance misuse, alcohol, all of those. Yes. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the questions that I've harvested from the comments. One of them was that, how can childhood sexual abuse be addressed in a marriage that does not have children yet?
Okay, so the only reason why that person will want to address sexual abuse is probably because they've experienced some kind of abuse as a child. Because there would be no reason to talk about sexual abuse when you don't, you know what I mean? So here's what I would say to that person is, if the only reason that question would come up is because there's an experience of sexual abuse in the past, or you've witnessed it, or it happened to you. So that is a conversation you should have with your spouse. I tell people I don't do couples counseling, and the reason there's a whole bunch there I say I don't do it, and the reason I don't do it is because by the time they come to you, they just want to check a box. They're not ready to change. So what I do is trauma counseling, trauma therapy with couples. When couples are fighting about sex, for example, or when one says, oh, the other one is not having sex with me, the other one is not intimate enough, it's usually because one of them has been sexually abused in the past, but they never talked about it. Okay, they never talked about it. One thing you need to know about trauma is trauma of the past always stays in the present. It doesn't go away. Either you talk about it or you don't. So you were sexually violated when you were 10 years old, for example. You never said it, you never told anyone, and some people in our culture, it happens a lot. So maybe you've been severely molested and you didn't tell anyone. Then you get married, everybody happy and everything. Every time your husband touches you, it brings up that past stuff. You just cannot open up. You just cannot be free. You just can't, but you're not saying anything. The best thing to do is to share this stuff with each other. Let them know what happened. Let them know your struggles so that you can heal, you can help heal each other or get the help that you need. And when a child comes into that situation, what happened, I was sexually violated when I was a kid, when I was about 7 years old. It wasn't raped, but it was a sexual violation. And I remember when I started having kids, I didn't want any guy next to them. It'd be like, pull that up, wear that, do this, do that. Because I didn't trust anybody, because that was supposed to be a relative. Until I worked on my own traumas. You would now start overprotecting people or your children. You will make sure that, they don't do this, they don't do that. So just have a conversation, but I don't think that conversation is so much about the child you haven't had, but about the couple themselves.
Thank you very much for that. So the summary is, have a conversation with your spouse and get help if it needs to go that way. Thank you very much for that answer. There was also a quick one on if you could please cite the 14 generational study on epigenetics. The 14th generation. Okay. That's a very interesting one.
Wouldn't it be so great if I could just roll it up my tongue and say, oh, this is it? What I will do is I can send it to the doc for you so you guys can have it.
All right, thank you. That's really very helpful. So,
and please send me a reminder, because I will surely forget.
No worries about that.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted there. What accounts for the late emergence of trauma in high achievers?
I love that question. because they're usually the most missed.
Mm. Mm.
High achievers and this category of strong women, you know, boss ladies, they're usually missed because the society equates high achievement as wellness. High achievement could actually be a trauma response, because it means I had a client one time who said, I mean, high boss, like she's, if you know, she said, I started achieving because nobody noticed me in that house. Everybody else got the attention. She felt so neglected. She felt so unseen. And she said, okay, the only way they're going to notice me is if I start achieving, right? So when you see her, you're like, oh, that's the person you want to be like, but totally emotionally, psychologically damaged in different ways. So that's the reason, is because our society thinks when you're doing well, you're fine. I have a lot of children, more than ever before, in our centers, that we see that their parents refuse to believe there's anything wrong. They'll say, oh, but he's doing very well in school. She's doing very well in school. What could be the matter? Educational achievement, professional achievement does not equate to wellness, does not equate to emotional and psychological wellness.
Thank you so much for that. So the point is, achievement, whichever, any skill of life, does not automatically equate to wellness. So
correct.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good. Thank you for that. And then there's also there was a question about, yes, that whether you've got any studies you could cite on ACEs to particularly to do with incidence or prevalence in chronic illnesses in Black communities. That's relationship between ACEs and incidence and prevalence of chronic illnesses in Black communities.
In particularly Black communities, unless we go and do those studies ourselves. But what we do know is ACEs study itself. You can have it, Filetti, just Google ACEs study, it will come up for you. And you can see the studies that shows the correlation. But particularly amongst Black people, you would have to, I can't think of a particular study right now that is ACEs, but there's studies that shows our trauma and adult health issues are correlated. But it's funny how you guys tell me to cite something. I love that. Just cite something. Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna be staying here, like just citing stuff.
Actually, I think somebody's doing their homework already. So
thank you. Just research it yourself. It's there.
So there's a Google search. Brother Lars,
go to your Google Scholar. Go to Google Scholar and pull up those studies.
14th generation epigenetic.
We are doing a study right now. We're conducting a study right now in Ikorodu, Lagos, and over 500 young students. Over 500 students. We're currently writing it, but the study, our trauma screening that we did for the students, we had over 85% of 500 students who have experienced at least 2 traumatic events.
That's huge.
That's a huge. I can't wait to. We're still writing it, but that's what we're looking at. We just got it. It's amazing. Huge. I didn't think it was good. I mean, I didn't think we're going to go to 85%.
Thank you for sharing that. We are looking forward to having that in literature, for something to be cited again, and particularly for us to be, I think, particularly done in Nigeria. That's quite because I know that that's one of the issues about paucity of
Yep.
quality studies coming out of places like that. So that's really good. There was something, okay, there's a question here about, oh yes, there was a question about somebody who wanted to know whether if in a relationship, in a friendship, when they've been chronically neglected, or they've been chronically isolated and not treated well by their friends, whether that could actually result in trauma.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, but somebody who is chronically neglected by their friends, I can almost guarantee you it didn't start with the friendship. There was also something with that person earlier than that. Yeah, but yes, that would remember when we talk about complex trauma is compounded.
Yeah.
That's adding to what's probably already there. You have a hand that's up, by the way. This is African
Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman.
Yeah. Princess Falaji, please take the floor. Go ahead.
Hi, hello. Hi, Professor Akindotun. How are you? Thank you for a fantastic presentation. That was absolutely interesting and very easy to digest. My question is around the vicarious trauma that you mentioned. I think this is one area where we all probably would have experienced some form of trauma or the other, because we are constantly either listening to somebody or we are watching somebody, or especially nowadays with social media, people just drop videos in groups or on social media and you see something that traumatizes you. However, you explained that this is about a professional. I'm not sure I got that bit, which is where I need a bit of clarity. You said something about, or were you saying that this is what is majorly, it majorly relates to professionals in like medical or mental health field? Because again, I have noticed that unfortunately, since COVID, everybody has now become a mental health expert. And information that is out there most of the time may not be correct. So how do you then, as an individual or as somebody who's working with, if you own an initiative or you're supporting people, we've all had our own shares of trauma, and you're probably supporting others. How can you avoid this? I don't know if you can avoid it, but how can you manage this kind of trauma?
Well, good question. Thank you for asking that question. Yeah, everybody puts a mental health something around them now. It's amazing. But I'd rather there be more than less, because especially populations where there's not too many professionals. One of the reasons why we started our JARS Institute was because of that. Because I went to Nigeria and everybody was calling themselves a mental health specialist. And I asked them, I said, what training? I was just talking to someone. I was like, what training do you have? And they were like, oh, I took an anger management course. And I was like, what? And then somebody else said they took an emotional intelligence course. And from somebody who is, that was just to me unacceptable. And so we started this training. Anyway, when you are it's a professional, vicarious trauma is a professional wounding, either informal or formal, either volunteer or paid. So when you are exposed to other person, you're listening constantly to that. Now, does that mean that won't happen if you're doing it with your friend? It would, but it just doesn't qualify under vicarious trauma in terms of diagnosis. Does that make sense? All right. So how do you prevent? The first thing is take care of you. Protect yourself. When you look, let me just put this here. This triangle right here, right? Well, it should be a triangle, right? This triad, this is a wellness triad right here. 3 things. Number 1 is pleasure and desire. It's part of that triangle. Secondly, is personal goals, is part of that triangle. Thirdly, is purpose. It's part of that triangle. A lot of us spend 90% of our lives or more on purpose. What am I here for? What am I here for? My purpose, my goal. I'm going to do this. I'm working for people. I have to do this. So you're constantly on purpose. Everything you're doing is purpose, 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 purpose. When you do that, you are out of alignment. You will get wounded. You're at risk. You understand? So at least those three things should be together. So you should have some desire, some pleasure in your life. Like add something to your life that you love to do, that makes you happy, that is not deep, that's not deep. Like, do you like to paint? Do you like to, what is your pleasure? Some people don't even know. I have clients who will say, I don't know. I don't know what that means. Pleasure and desire. What do you desire? The second thing is your own personal goal. How are you, for you, not because of some purpose, how are you developing your personal self? We know you went to school to be a lawyer, you went to school to be this, but what do you want to do? Like, what is it that you want to learn to do for you? Maybe you want to learn to ride a bike. Maybe you want to learn how to do something just for you, personal goal. And then that purpose thing. So if we can get our lives in kind of that, in aligned a little bit, right? You will move from the at risk to the protected. And then the other things that I've said, make sure that you're not always seeing trauma clients. Constantly trauma. I don't know how the psychiatrist is going to avoid that. That's your job. But I mean, the rest of us, if you can avoid it, it's not always trauma. Like have some other things in between, or find another job that you love to do, another thing that adds value to your life, and have healthy spaces. Stop yelling so much. Slow everything down. Trauma is very rapid, right? So consciously slow everything down, even the way you talk. Slow everything down, right? And just practice some of the other things that we've said today, and you'll be in a better position. I hope that helps you.
Thank you for that, Professor Merino. I think the bit you said about psychiatrists, how do we avoid seeing trauma patients all the time? I think there are a few ways around it. One of them is to do a job share. One of them is to rotate in your jobs. The other one is to have a very healthy balanced group, or to have a very healthy peer group, CPD group. And sometimes to actually choose some of the things that you enjoy and ring fence them in your diary. But it's a very valid point.
Excellent. Right. Take some vacations. Like some people have not taken, and they wear like a badge of honor. I have never taken a day off in this year. Like, why? It's not your, what are you talking about? If you die, the job is going to go on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very important point.
Take a vacation.
Yeah, very important point. Okay, I can say hand up, but and I'm going to come to you, Mr. Ladi Omole. I'm going to come to you in a minute. I've got there's just a question here that's been waiting for a while, which I'm going to read out, and then I'll take yours, Mr. Omole. It says, are there studies in link between PTSD and mania or psychotic episodes, BPD? Please go ahead.
BPD. Actually, there's a whole literature out there on that, and some people that have actually been diagnosed with borderline personality are actually traumatized clients.
Oh, yeah.
So depending on where you stand on the literature, not that they're not valid, borderline personality diagnosis, However, we need to look at trauma in terms of when we're conceptualizing this clients, because there's been a lot of misdiagnosis. Anyway, the answer to your question, because you just touched something that I could get on a podium. I have my own thoughts about, but yes, there are a lot of studies out there, a plethora of studies out there for that. You can just find them in any of your search engines.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Omole, please go for it, Lady Omole.
Yes, thank you very much. This has been very informative. We really enjoy it and gain a lot from it. Now, some of the prescriptions that you've recommended so far has been more on a behavioral level, what to do and what not to do. And in your breathing recommendation, you also mentioned that doing that will actually help your serotonin, which I believe is part of the neurotransmitters. Now, my question to you is this: how much help can medication help in terms of a trauma or to kind of normalize the behavior?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I tried to do in this presentation was make it as comfortable as possible, so that I didn't want to get into too many deep levels of stuff. But your question, yes, there's a place for medication. Of course, Dr. Ajayi can also talk to this. But yes, one thing I want to say about medication is that when you talk about psychopharmacology, and one of the things I want to say is this: we need to erase stigma around mental health. All right, the stigma around mental health, because a lot of this, there are medication that can also help. All right, so if you have high blood pressure, nobody's going to think twice to take medication, right? As well as also other behavioral stuff, right? One thing I have found is if you have a proclivity, if you have a genetic predisposition to mental illness, because there are genetic markers in this, we see them in generations. If you have a genetic predisposition to this, right, you're going to suffer more, especially when you're in adverse situations. So we'll find clients who we are trying to do behavioral or cognitive or trauma work with, but because this is not just something that happened to them, this is something that is generational with them. There's mental illness in the family. And if that is the case, medication just allows you to get a footing, a place to land. You understand? A place to land. There's no need to suffer so much if there can be medication, right? And I don't know the way it works over there in the UK, but I'm sure they're civilized country, so they probably do it the way we do. We work with when you are on medication and you see a psychiatrist, it's every month. They give it to you for 30 days. The reason why is because there's going to be monitoring of how you're responding to that medication. Should we increase the dosage? Should we decrease the dosage? Should we do all of this thing? So there is a place for medication, and some medication are not for life. It's just until you get yourself together, right? There are some, if you have bipolar, if you have schizophrenia, if you have those sub serious mental illnesses, you might need to take medication for the rest of your life, but you'll be able to take medication and therapy. Don't do just medication and no therapy. Those two things go hand in hand. Dr. Ajayi, you want to say something? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that indeed it's a holistic approach in which we adopt a biopsychosocial model in terms of biological, in terms of the medication, also psychological therapies, a plethora of them, and also social interventions, debt management, things, vocational skills, all of those. And in fact, in the UK now, the Royal College of Psychiatrists is actually talking about even a spiritual module as well. We are beginning to talk about the special interest group inside in special spirituality special interest group, where we are looking at the spiritual impact on mental well-being. So it's all very holistic, and it's got to be very rounded. It's not just one approach. It's a
absolutely
very different approach. Yeah.
So don't be afraid of medicine. Don't be afraid of medicine if you need it, please.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
I actually like that approach, because that's not always very common. I think it's good to look at things in a very dual way rather than So
Absolutely.
there is a question here. I'm quite aware that we've got 11 minutes, so I'm going to take about a couple of more questions. And how can one help children from a traumatized parent, knowing that the reaction to the parent can be damaging to them?
I love that question. Be open, be honest with your children, talk to your children, let them know what is going on. This is dear to my heart when I talk about this, because don't be too proud. There's the Igbos, the Igbos in Nigeria have a saying. They say the day you wake up is your morning. Okay, the day you wake up is your morning. So it's never too late to do the right things, right? Start by having a family meeting and saying, how are you all experiencing this house? How are you experiencing things? They will tell you the truth. They'll let you know what is happening, what they're getting from you. And don't be defensive. Don't be defensive. Say, oh, I honestly didn't know that was what you guys were feeling from me. It could be because, mommy's going through this and this and that. You don't have to tell them all the gory details of your life, especially depending on their age, but I'm working on it, and let's work on this together. So that is a very simple way to start. The day you wake up is your morning. The day when you hear this information, you save them, you save their life, you're saving them, because they're going to end up marrying the wrong person. They're going to end up choosing the wrong job or choosing this and that. And then you have to clean up the mess, all this mess later. No, let's do it now so that they can actually be who God has called them to be in their world.
Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. I think just to reinforce that, I think there was somebody else who asked a question about how one could manage or how one could support a spouse who's been abused. And I think you've already taken that already, but perhaps you want to speak into that again in terms of a spouse. One is with a spouse who's been abused.
A spouse who has been abused,
sexually abused,
been abused, and
okay.
Hopefully the environment is healthy. Yeah, because usually people who have been abused end up with marrying people who are going to reinforce the abuse. So that's usually how it happens.
Yeah.
But if you're asking that question, we want to make sure that you are not a trigger. You're not a trigger, and then talk about it and get help. Look, get help. Just get help. There's help out there. Talk to Dr. Ajayi. Maybe they can recommend you to different people. We in our institute, we have people all across, so we can recommend you too. It is you decide, I'm not going to be the trigger. What does that mean? It means that I'm not the one going to constantly be abusive. Maybe it's your life. There's something called trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care means that I am aware that people are traumatized. See, that husband that's not acting right or that wife that's not acting right. It's not about you. It's usually the past is in the present. The trauma is the problem. If I had a client who, we had this client who came in and he said, my wife is always cheating. She's always cheating on me. The wife has never cheated on him. But anytime this woman talks to anybody, it doesn't matter who, they think that she's cheating. The first question we asked was, when was your first experience with abandonment? Who first left you? So all the past issue is what's coming up in the marriage. Do you understand? We found out that he's been abused for so and abandoned for so long. So it is not so much that person is evil. Trauma-informed care means that I am aware that the people around me are dealing with crap. They're dealing with their own stuff. Some things they don't even know they're dealing with. And because of that, I am going to act in compassion. I am going to not be a trigger. And I will also heal myself. That's how we do this thing, people. Especially in Black communities, we need to start healing. Come on, we need to start healing of all this stuff. Enough. Thank you.
Thanks. I think the message you are strongly putting out there, which I also very much endorse, is that really it's okay to get help. No matter at what level you are, no matter what your psychosocial background is, it's okay to get help. And there's nothing to be ashamed about, because you didn't attract the abuse. Nobody came into the world and said, oh yes, when I'm 3 years old, I would like to be touched inappropriately, I would like to be molested, or I would like to see my children, my parents fighting, or go through a bitter divorce, of parental divorce. Nobody chose that. It's just that they came into the world and they found themselves like that. And it's okay not to own that, but also to get help. I think that's the point that is really very important to come. And I just want to also reassure people who particularly, I'm sure there are a lot of people of Christian background and from Black community here today who are thinking, oh yes, is the therapist going to understand my background, my Black background? Are they going to understand my spiritual background? The reality is that there are even services out there now who actually target Black people, who target people of faith. So it's important to really, it's until you ask for help that you get help. And it's important to just put oneself out there and really see that help is available. Very quickly, I'm just going to take two together, and then that just will be the last two final points. I can see that there's still some hands raised, but I'm also very keen to honor your time, Professor Merino, because I know you've been very, very generous this evening. So there is one that says, what should you do if you're in a relationship, but your partner cuts off and ends ever abruptly? So somebody is in a relationship with a partner who always ends the relationship abruptly. So that's one. And then there was one also about how do you deal with self-care as a minister? How do you maintain a bit balance in terms of purpose? And if you're a naturally driven person, how do you then maintain that balance to incorporate the personal goals and pleasure?
Thank you for that. I really only have a few minutes because I have a client coming up. But what I would say is, if you're a minister, honestly, I pastored for years. You have to be intentional. You have to be intentional. Or if you're someone that's driven, you just have to be intentional. You have to plan it. I do a lot of traveling. Lately, I do a lot of traveling, but I intentionally make sure I plan fun in my travel. So you need to just be intentional about it. And then the one who has who is always breaking it up, that's somebody who has what we call relational trauma, who probably has been abandoned themselves in several ways. So look, if you have relational trauma, that means you have some interpersonal traumas growing up, teenage years, whatever. You're going to find it difficult to commit to anybody. Even when you get married, you're not going to have an intimate relationship. You will have what we call a transactional relationship. What did you bring to the table? What am I bringing to the table? Intimacy is going to be difficult for you because you just did not develop that. So that person so you're going to sabotage relationship. You're going to have chaotic relationship, or whatever what the guy said that they keep breaking it up. So that person is not ready for the kind of relationship you're looking for. So if they can get help, then maybe they might be ready.
Okay. Thank you. And that's going to be the last question. And I'll just like everyone in the room this evening to please just put your hands together for Professor Merino, just to appreciate her for giving so much of herself tonight. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and giving so
Thank you,
freely.
Thank you.
Thank you, for
Thank you,
spending time
guys.
with us this
I have to really go, but
Yes,
I'm
that's
so
fine.
glad I had
Thank
this
you,
time.
thank you,
very
thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Right.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Adele.
You are welcome.
Dr.
Thank you, everyone.
God bless.
So I know there's been lots of questions tonight about where to get the recording and whether you could listen to it again. And actually, it is possible to listen to it. I'm just going to ask Boyikumi, could you please post the Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing YouTube channel, please? If you could please post that now. Then so that people can click on it, and what will happen is if you subscribe to that channel, as soon as this video is edited and uploaded, you would automatically be notified, and that will mean that you will know when it's been uploaded onto the channel. So if you could please just good. So that's the channel is been posted now. It's been posted. That's this comment. I'm just going to repost that so everyone can. It's Tripart. If you go on YouTube and you type in Tripart Care, it will be it will bring us up, and all you need to do is just to subscribe to the channel, and automatically it will bring up the recording for you. Automatically, when we upload the recording, it will let you know. I just want to thank everyone who has meditated an evening with us tonight. Everyone has participated, you've contributed, and I really earnestly hope it's been worth your while. I can see so many of people in my personal personal network who are here tonight. Some of them I've recognized, and I just want to say, I believe my Uncle Johnson is here all the way from Ibadan. Thank you, sir, for joining us as always. And so many of the people from church, so many people who support us, who continue to put this into public domain. It's been such a very big turnout tonight. I think at the peak we were about 147 people on the call. And I really do hope, I think this is something that I'm going to go and listen to again. I'm going to take time when I'm relaxed. One of the points that was made, which I thought I'll touch on, was the point of meditation. And like I've always said, that meditation does not have to be Eastern meditation, that we can actually take time to meditate on scriptures, to mull over things that the promises of God, whilst we are relaxed, in a relaxed state, whilst we are just putting those thoughts in our hearts and really mulling over them and thinking about what that means in my particular situation and in my particular in my particular context. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's been such an awesome time. And just to say, I did say that I was going to make a special announcement, just to say that in May, we're going to be running the third edition, which the third annual Tripart Care Mind Gym course for young adults between the ages of 18 and 35. We've run this last 2 years, but this year I'm particularly excited and I'm raring to go. And the reason for that is because the course has now been remodeled after the 60 Tripart Care model. And that means that we are really going to have an opportunity to delve deep into some of these things that have been said tonight. How do you deal with your trauma? How do you deal with your thoughts? How do you deal with your temple? And the other exciting thing is that very, very soon, that's also going to be announced during one of our meetings. We are going to be having a very qualified dietitian speak to us about mental health and food. You know, sometimes it's actually, if we could only change our diets a bit, and this is honest, that if we could only tweak our diets a bit, it's amazing the results that we're going to get. And the reason why I'm excited about some of these things is because they work. Professor Merino was speaking about, was talking about breathing exercises. I do it every time for my clients. When they come into the room, they are so anxious, their blood pressure is up, and then you actually talk them through breathing exercises, and remarkably, the blood pressure falls right there and then in your presence. So these things, there are little things that we can do to actually improve our lives. And like I said, that they don't have to be things that we're uncomfortable with. We can actually choose to, we can focus on scriptural promises of God. If that's what I do, for instance. And I've always said that it doesn't, that when I talk about meditation, that's what I mean. Right, I'm just going to mute again. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And for if you want to make contacts, I'm just going to put the contacts in the event that you want to. Maybe there are people who have decided now that actually after airing all this, I'm going to ask for help. That's the way to contact us. That's the YouTube channel. That's my Facebook. I'm also on LinkedIn, and there's Instagram. Thank you so much for staying with us tonight, and God bless you all, and have a very good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. God bless.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Pastor Adewoye for joining us. Pastor Adewoye is the one that actually raised me spiritually in terms of my spiritual and Christian values. It's such a great honor to have you here tonight. Thank you for joining us, sir. It's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much, sir.
Bless God. God bless you too. Well done. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Regards to Bukumi.
Thank you. God bless
God
you.
bless you, man. Bye-bye.
God bless you.
Will the recording be available on YouTube?
God bless you. This is a cap from
Oh, thank you so much, Sister Yinka, for joining us. It's really good to have you. Sister Yinka, big sister. Bless you. Thank you for joining us. Well, yes, in terms of when it will be available, we'll make this as quickly as possible. We are open to work to possibly within the next week or two, hopefully quicker. It's just about getting the editor to do that and to fast track it.
Thank you.
And Brother Japhet Songaro, I can see you there. Bless you for all the support you give to Tripart Care. We really appreciate you. And of course, my family, my wife and my daughters are the #1 fans. Bless you.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
To Sir Uncle Johnson, appreciate you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
Amen, sir. Thank you for all your support over the years.
Good night.
Good night, sir.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.